This morning, I only found out I was doing this on Sunday. I have broken every single rule on presentation. What I've basically done is throw my speaker's notes up in Prezi, and it's going to be pretty rough. So feel free to ask questions. Absolutely open to that. We'll try and keep it general rather than specific. I'm more than happy to talk to anyone about their product development, particular worlds, but afterwards. Cool. God, I've been programming for years, since I was 10 years old, so I could be older now. I've been developing products for 20 years in small companies, large companies. I have won an award for one of my products, which was great. Best new record management product from Document Manager magazine, 2 years running in 2008 and 2009. So that's actually not as impressive as it sounds. But, and the side notes have gone. We'll get there. Cool, so today I'm going to talk about product development. What is product development? It's basically the bit where you've got an idea about what the market wants, you research that, you find what the market actually needs, now you actually need to build a product to meet that demand. Check this on that. So product development, the key point, product development happens after customer development. You need to know who your product is. You need to know what problem you're solving, who's going to buy that solution from you. The person you're solving the problem for may not be the same person who's actually buying it from you, if you see what I mean, and that you may be solving a problem in social media and therefore selling advertising to do that to your customers, your advertisers, whereas the problem you're solving is for a different bunch of people. But you need to know that, you need all of that. And you need to have it validated. In other words, you need to be absolutely sure that you've got a market that will buy this product. The reason for that is that there are people every year who go bankrupt building products that they haven't got a market for. It's really easy to do. I've seen it happen 100 times where somebody goes, I've got this brilliant idea for a thing, I'd love it, so therefore everybody else would love it. And so they go out and they build this huge product and then find that they've got to change it so much in order to make it fit the market that they thought they had, that they actually go bankrupt trying to change that. It's really tough. Next one, please. Okay, so product development is about continually learning about your customers. Like everything in lean startup and the startup movement generally, you have a hypothesis about what your customers want, and so you build something, measure the customer's response to that, and learn from that. It's exactly the same with product development. Product development is one of the means that you have to do this. The other thing is product development is a process. It's not a fixed cost, it's a process. And it will never be complete. You'll never finish developing a product. There is never any point in which you can say, right, it's done now, it's great, I can go and sell it. You should be selling it when it's half complete, and keep on going, because it will never be complete. Next one, please. There's a thing in marketing about, so the market for my product is everybody in the whole world, and if I could just capture 1% of that, then I'll be rich. Which basically tells anyone that you say that to, that you have no idea who your customers are, or where your market is, or how you're going to reach them. And it's exactly the same with product development. If somebody says to you, says to me, and they do every week, how much is it going to cost to build this? Then, basically I could quote you $50,000, and I could take your money, and you get something that probably match what you initially wanted for, but it's not a product because you're not going through the product development process. You need to think of this as just like advertising, as an ongoing expenditure that you'll continually have to do as part of your business is develop your product. And so rather than saying it's $50,000 to develop your product, it's $100,000 a year to maintain your product development effort. Keep going. So how does this process work? Basically, think about features. Usually the best way of doing this, and there are other ways of doing this, but the best way for people who haven't used this product or used this process is as user stories. As a person in your system, I want to be able to do something so that result. If you can think of all your product features like that and think of them from the user's point of view, what do they want to do in order to achieve a result? List everything you possibly can, every single feature. Pick the most important one that's going to give you the greatest value or the customer the greatest value. Build it, measure the customer response to it, repeat. Notice there's no repeat until it's just repeat. It's like I said, it's an endless process of creating value. Trello is a beautiful system for doing this on. It's kind of become the de facto now for doing this. So you have a to-do list, which is your product, otherwise known as your product backlog, with all your features. Everything you want to create, you possibly could create in that From that, you approve features for development. So your developers will be doing some of those features, and then when they finish developing them, they go to the done pile where you review them. Once you finish reviewing them, you're happy that they work, all the rest of it, implement them as well, archive them off the board. If there's bugs or any other defects, they roll back to doing, the developer works on them, and very occasionally you'll implement a feature which actually nobody wants, and you get a negative customer reaction to you, so you have to roll back the whole feature. It does happen, it's fun. Keep going. I put this together in this bit. I'm not sure this is the right diagram for this, but basically there's a whole bunch of features that you can think of, which is your initial idea of the product. And there's a whole bunch of features in that area that customers will pay for. In between there is your product. Any features in here that you can think of that you've implemented but your customers won't actually pay for is just crap. And you should pull that out of your product. And you should be continually moving this way. So trying to get more features, finding the features that your customers will actually pay for and implementing them into your product. There are features that your customers will pay for that you can't actually implement. Yeah, because of technology, any other reasons. It might be too expensive to develop, but the customers would love it, or they won't pay enough for it for the development cost. So there are features that customers will pay for that will forever stay on the right-hand side. And there's stuff that you can think of that customers don't ever want. Microsoft Word has this huge problem. There's endless features in there that like 0.5% of its customer base actually use and want and would pay for. And everyone else just thinks that is crap. But somewhere there's some company that depends on that particular feature in order to run some weird Excel spreadsheet that they developed back in 1986, and they have to keep it going. Microsoft has to keep it going because otherwise they annoy their customer base. Cool. Okay, analysis, architecture and design. Has anyone got any questions at this point, by the way? No questions? I hope that's a good sign. Because your feature set is continually evolving and your product is continually evolving, you won't be able to define your entire feature set, everything in your product right from the start. You can easily overanalyze this, create too much architecture, think it too much up ahead. But having said that, plowing straight in and just starting building features and slapping it together equally doesn't work. So there's a kind of middle ground of a certain amount of analysis and architecture is really worthwhile. And that quote up there has just been invented by me for this presentation. But, you know. If you can go on to the next one, and we'll go and have a look. Entity relationship diagrams are part of UML, which is Universal Modeling Language. Fairly techy, but this is really simple. This is basically, if you can think of all the things, people, actors, objects, stuff in your system, and how they're related and what attributes they have, then it's fairly easy diagram format to put in. It also means you can define a common set of language that you and your developers can start talking to each other. So I've knocked together, this is a 30-second example based on Naughty 3D, actually. So it becomes very easy to tell stories like this. So a user uploads a design, a user selects a design to turn into a model, a user confirms a model to make an order, and so on. You can tell stories about this. So when you're writing a user story, you can say, as a user, I want to upload a design so that another user can select it to become a model. If you said, as a user, I wanted to upload a model so another user can select it as an order, you can see how you're suddenly, because your language and your feature descriptions, your user stories, isn't matching up to what your design is, you can create confusion. So if you can do this as a kind of top-level view of your whole system, and then keep your language consistent with this when you do your user stories, you just make life easier for everybody. This becomes your sort of vocabulary about your system. Does that make sense to everyone? Come on, nod. Give me some feedback. Cool. All right, let's move on. The other one I want to say here, good design is hard to spot. Bad design is annoyingly obvious. Bad design is a negative feature. In that it needs to go up on the feature list as fix this, it's bad design. It will become really obvious when you've got bad design because it will be staring in your face. It will be, your users will be talking to you about it. It's really good design is stuff that users either don't comment on or comment on positively. It's the same with bad project management. It's really easy to spot because everything is a mess. Good project management, you just slide by and you never notice. Keep going. Well, this is when more slides start getting fairly random because there's a difference between a demo and an MVP. Does everyone know what an MVP is? Minimum viable product. One nod. Okay.
Welcome to the morning part of the
Come on, people. Okay, so a demo is there to solve a tricky part of your product. So if you've got a technically hard product that's got technical problems that need to be solved in it, then you can create a technical demo that actually solves that particular nugget of the application. It's not the full feature set, it doesn't work entirely, but it will just be a Audio 3D is an example. We're dealing with 3D stuff in the browser. It's a bit new and up and coming, so we created a tech demo that solves that particular problem. It's not suitable, I wouldn't put it in front of the customer, it looks ugly as hell, but if we get questions about have you solved this hard bit of your problem, then we can say, yes, look, here's a tech demo. We know how to solve this. This is solvable. Customer demo, if this is particularly pertinent, when your customer isn't the person you're solving the problem for. So the people you're selling advertising to, for instance, may not understand the problem that your product is actually solving because they're not the target market for the problem, if you see what I mean. So you may have to explain to your advertising customers why you've created this particular product and who it's being marketed at so they can understand who their adverts are going to. So for that, you may need a customer demo. And sales demos, this is really, really, really important in B2B sales. B2B sales take an average of 2 years, depending on the product, but assume it's a good average of 2 years from initial contact through to purchase order. If you can make that initial contact with a sales demo, that means you've invested as little as possible. You haven't actually built your MVP, you haven't built your product, you haven't invested this huge amount of time and money into product development. All you've got is a little sales demo that you can walk your customer through the product with. And if you can do that at absolute minimum and start that conversation 2 years before or sometime before you've actually finished your product, then that's better. You know, you're going to get your sales quicker. So it also, if you've got a sales force that are selling, then it's hand-holding for them. The more material they can have to actually demonstrate to the customer that you've got a real product and that they can stay on message, because it's really easy for a salesperson to get off message if they start having a dialogue with a customer. So a sales demo can help reinforce that. However, the real danger is that you get a salesperson in front of a customer who goes through a sales demo and says, look, it all works, it's great, we can sell this, and arranges a sale next week. It's great to have a sale next week, but you still need to manage this whole process. And that's why a sales demo is not an MVP. Don't get the two confused. Don't try and build your sales demo as an MVP, and don't sell the sales demo as if it was an MVP. It's really important. A demo is there to fix a technical problem or to demonstrate something about your system. An MVP is something you can actually sell to a customer. They're different. Cool. Some real-world numbers. This is based on my experience with Visual Basic. Technology from yesteryear. Isaac was saying he had some completely different and very scary numbers. So these are hundreds of hours to build a sales demo, tech demo, whatever it was, and then hundreds of hours to get to an MVP, also. So that's 1,000 hours to get to an MVP in this case. Ongoing commitment, 2 full-time equivalents, 15k each back in the 90s. It's not scary these days. You'll notice this one's a bit fun. So they spend all that time, money and everything, and then abandon the product. It was actually an internal system, didn't have a customer base for it. They were trying to sell it to a customer base, but the whole thing just fell apart. It does happen, but they spent 1,000 hours, developer hours, and there weren't cheap developer hours, there's always one of them, building that whole product, and we just walked away from it. It does happen. So, yeah. This one is one I'm working on at the moment. I've spent about 200 hours creating a sales demo, and we're still having a conversation with the customer to try and work out who the hell's going to buy this. So we haven't got to MVP stage yet. So, cool. Any questions on that? What was your example?
Oh, I don't want to talk about it. Don't take a deep breath.
But yeah, you should be talking, on average these days, 500 to 1,000 hours, developer hours, to actually get to an MVP that you can sell. So you don't want to do that unless you're absolutely clear that you've got a market there. This is why product development happens after you've established your market. Okay. Selection and care of monkeys. I get asked a lot about what language to develop in. Don't worry about language, leave that up to your developers, basically. Find a good developer. A good developer is somebody you can communicate easily with. I have no prejudice about outsourcing. Just make sure you create a relationship with the developer that will be ongoing. Don't treat this as a one-off project where you hand over $20,000 to some guy in Afghanistan and he creates your product and that's it, you both walk away. That's not going to happen, and you're just throwing $20,000 away, basically. You need to create a relationship with your developer. It needs to be ongoing. They need to be continually working on your feature set. This is a long-term engagement you've got. So, it's pretty much self-explanatory.
Well, the last line isn't self-explanatory.
Okay.
Can you explain that?
First of all, developers are people too, 40 hours a week. I have run technical teams for years and years and years, and 8 hours, after 8 hours, your code monkey will start going fizzy around the head, and he'll start writing crap into your code base. You don't want that. I have once pulled a 36-hour shift, writing code, to try and get the product out on time. I can tell you, the last 20 hours, I just wrote bugs. I mean, it was just constant bugs. I would have been much better just go home, come back, do another 8 hours or 10-hour shift, push that. I found basically 40 hours a week is the most you can productively get out of a code monkey before it starts going a bit, flinging poo all over the place. But there's a huge temptation as a managers to push that, to keep pushing. The longer you can keep your developers working, the better, the quicker your product will come out. It doesn't work like that. So plan for 40 hours a week. That's it. 99% of software bugs are caused by management because by the time you've gone through testing, you should have erased all your bugs. But if you don't do your acceptance testing and the feature doesn't do what you require, that's your fault as managers. And that's where quite a lot of bugs creep in. Developers are usually pretty good about catching their own bugs. Testing, if you haven't got a testing process in place, that's your fault. If you let a bug go to a customer, that's your fault as managers, not the developer's fault. There's also scheduling. You haven't communicated clearly enough. There's all sorts of stuff around the communication and management of the software developers that means that 99% of software bugs are actually caused by management. Don't separate off and go create a blame culture where every time anything goes wrong, that's the developer's fault. It's your fault as well. You're part of a team, this is a process, all of that. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah? You can accept that?
Marcus?
Yes.
Not all developers are that well communicators.
No.
So how do you handle that?
The communication styles. Learn your developers' communication styles. Developers are people too, so some people are going to be extroverts and will need to talk through everything that they're doing. Some people will be introverts, and you'll need to use a lot of written communication and lots of one-on-one, not lots of one-on-one time, but this focused, specific agenda covered one-on-one time. So if you've got an answer, one of the problems with outsourced programmers is not that they're crap programmers or anything, but just the communication becomes really difficult. It becomes really difficult to create and maintain a working relationship with somebody who lives in Afghanistan or wherever. But the people, it's all about people management skills and clear communication. Try and get as much written as you possibly can, purely because it's there. It can be difficult to interpret a conversation. Written communication tends to be a little bit clearer. So, but yeah, ultimately it's down to people skills. If you find you've got a developer that you don't get on with, you can't communicate clearly with, then get rid of them. It's that simple. If you can't maintain that communication channel, then they can't work for it. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Any others? No? Cool. Right. Testing, I just went over testing briefly, but it's nice to be clear about what exactly we're talking about in testing. Unit tests tests done by the coder during development. Every single piece of code, every single function in your system should have a unit test covering it. Integration tests done again by the coder. You shouldn't have to worry about this too much, but there are integrations between different modules in the system to make sure that each module does what it says it does and should do. Regression tests done when introducing a new feature into an existing system. You do a bunch of regression tests on the new system to make sure that it doesn't break anything out, because that happens. And acceptance tests. The reason I highlighted red, acceptance tests is where you come in. If you've got a developer writing software and testing it all, and then wants to put that feature into your system, it's your system. You have to verify that that feature does what you said it would. You have to take responsibility for accepting that feature into the system. I've seen a lot of managers basically walk away from this part of it and just go, yeah, well, and then blame the developer when the feature wasn't communicated clearly enough and didn't do what was actually intended. Acceptance tests are your chance to make sure that you have communicated the feature set clearly enough that the developer understood it, that they've written what you wanted them to, and that what you're just about to implement into the system is going to do something that your customer will pay for. It's also your sign-off on your code if you're dealing with an external developer, an outsourced one especially, that's your sign-off. If you don't do your acceptance testing, you sign off on it, and later it turns out it was buggy, that's your fault. So, you know. Okay, let's move on. What really technical stuff. Okay, version control. You absolutely need version control, completely, 100%. There's no argument about it. You must have it. I recommend Git, but there's other stuff around. The main reason for this is so that you can roll back a feature. If you've added a feature your customer doesn't actually want, then you should be able to just say, right, roll it back, cut it out. You need to structure your Git repository if you're using Git so that every single feature fits in its own branch and you can pull it back out again if you want to. Your developer, discuss this with your developer, whatever they're using, but it's absolutely key. Development, test, and production servers. If you develop on a development server, you test on the test server, and you ship to production on a production server. Do not give your developers access to your production server. They only get to fix things on the test server. If you find a problem in production, roll the whole thing back to test. Well, basically, you roll your test server back to the same state that the production server is, fix the problem in the development server, and then roll the fix onto the test server and test it there. Don't try and fix stuff on the production server because you will break more stuff. And you'll end up in this horrible mess where customers are complaining. It's just terrible. Just roll it neatly back to a version that worked previously, fix the stuff on the test server, and then roll that back out again. And the last point, cloud deployment. Don't bother buying hardware. Chuck it all on the cloud. It's just way easier, simpler, better. And make sure that you control it. There's a lot of developers that will offer to host your stuff and do all that. No, you control your service. So at least the test and production servers must be under your control. So you're paying the bills for them, you've got the admin passwords. The rest of the production server, the developers shouldn't even have access to it. There shouldn't be an admin password. So they shouldn't be able to get to that at all, apart from as normal user login. Does that make sense? Cool. Move on. Okay, so that's the end of the rambling slides I had. That's basically product development 101. Have an idea, find your market, confirm it, find someone to develop your product, list your features, don't know any tricky bits. Well, you can read. Any questions? Come on.
Marcus, do you think this works even for solo entrepreneurs who are hiring, when you talked about outsourcing development and things like that? Is this a process that can work for an individual entrepreneur?
Yes, absolutely. This is... you have to put in some measure of the initial fundamentals so that when you scale, as you scale, there's something for everyone to fit into. So the example of this is continuous integration. Continuous integration is a process whereby every time you check in new code, it goes to the test server and then gets tested automatically and goes to the production server. It's fantastic for larger teams. It tends to be overkill for smaller teams. But if your developer really likes it and they want to put it in, then you can do that right at the start. So as much of this as you can possibly adopt as soon as you possibly can is really good. But beware of overkill, and you can over-architecture it. You can. And if you're a personal developer, if you're like me, so I write my own code for my own products, then a lot of this becomes stuff I do in my head rather than explicitly on a system. But I still do it. So yeah, it's definitely worth it. Cool.
What kind of methodology would you recommend? Like waterfall, agile, they're moving now from one to another. You've been talking about project manager, which is not agile stuff.
Okay. So phrase the question. What kind of methodology would I recommend for product development? I don't follow any particular methodology, and this is a bastardized version of Agile that I've worked out myself. Any Scrum people who you talk to would be shrieking in horror at half the things I've told you. But that's okay. That's this is something that I found works for me, and it is a mixture of methods. If I was working on a larger team, I'd be more formal. I would definitely have more meetings. Instead of doing individual features, I'd be doing sprints. There's a whole bunch of things that would be, which is why I'm saying a project manager or a product manager can really help with this, because they can sit over the team, between the ideas guys and the sales guys and all the rest of it, and the actual development team. So yes, whatever works is the primary thing. But your agile is essentially the overall methodology that I recommend. It fits with the lean startup methodology really well. That whole build, measure, learn loop fits exactly into agile. So I roughly call it agile methodology, but there's a lot of torrent in that. But, yeah.
How do you determine productivity?
How do you
determine productivity?
How do you measure productivity?
Yeah.
Interesting question. I don't pay by the hour. I pay by feature. So productivity becomes less of an issue if you're paying by fixed cost per feature. I realise not many people, other people like to pay by hour. It becomes really hard because it's a creative process. Programming is a creative process, and so there's a lot of failure involved. I'm actually trying to work out some way of measuring productivity in creative ways by measuring the number of failures, but it's not there yet.
So the way I see it, every project will have different requirements, different development time.
Absolutely.
And then every developer will have different skills that apply on different projects. And as a manager, even if you have a little bit of tech knowledge, if you don't have a lot, or you're not a developer yourself, there's no really a tool where you can just say, well, that much work will take that much time. You can roughly get understanding by doing testing of a certain portion of the product and say, okay, you've done the task, it took you 3 hours. I got about 80% left, so I'll do 3 multiplied by 8, and I get another point. But it's very tricky.
It is. And the programming profession doesn't have a good answer for how to measure productivity yet. Which is why, in product development, especially on outsourced teams, I prefer fixed cost per feature. Because you can tell how much that feature is worth to your product. So you specify the feature, get the developer to estimate on that. So they estimate a fixed cost. You agree a deadline between you when that will be delivered. If the cost and the deadline match what you're prepared to accept, you go for it, you approve the feature and it goes ahead. If they're not, then you can either carry on talking to them or redefine the feature or go back and do it. But it becomes a nice, easy conversation for you to have because you know how much that feature is worth for your customers, so you don't really know how much it's worth. And if it's not worth developing, don't develop it. Leave it on the feature list, don't approve it. If it is worth developing and it turns out it's easy, then that's fine. However, some developers don't, because this basically puts some of the risk onto them, some developers don't like working on a fixed cost basis. There's not much I can suggest.
Especially with complicated stuff, because they might not see stuff that can pop up later.
Yeah. You really need to. It's down to developers to estimate how long they think a particular feature will take, and then you approve or deny that estimate. If they're not meeting their estimates, then that's a conversation you can have. And if they estimate it's going to take 5 hours and they actually build it in 10, then go back and have a discussion with them and try and work it out on that basis. But,
Can I just rephrase that a little bit? I think you're right. It has to be based on something measurable, and the feature is measurable. I also think it helps to have as many milestones as you can possibly have, like very small milestones, because at least a milestone is something when you've met it. It might not be a feature that you could deliver to a customer, but at least it's easier to get tracked if you've got lots of small milestones. It's that that helps you to see.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you've got it's a pretty good point. If you've got a really big feature that's going to take 3 months to develop, then try and split it into smaller features. You should really have nothing else that goes over 2 weeks. If they can't deliver it in 2 weeks, it's too big. Cut it down. Keep cutting it down. Good point. Thank you.
Yeah, so following on from the last one, it's more a question around any suggestions around how to ensure you're getting quality work. So, for example, if you're outsourcing a chunk of work overseas, you can get it back and acceptance test and it seems to work fine, but then you go to the developer a month later and say, can you add this feature? And they look at the code base and go, it's horrible. Are there any services or what suggestions would you have, sir?
Somebody like me, getting an experienced but way too expensive code monkey in Perth to review the code that's coming in and make that part of your acceptance testing is really the only way of doing it.
Yeah.
Unless you're comfortable reading code, then you won't be able to tell good code from bad. And on principle, if you've got unit tests that work, if you've got integration tests that work, if you've got regression tests that work, and you've done your acceptance testing properly, it shouldn't really matter what's under the bonnet, in theory. Any more questions? Yeah.
If your developer doesn't have access to your production server, how do you roll out the code?
Script. You you should have a script that rolls straight into
Writes the script.
There's AWS has a feature that does this. But yeah, I mean, use either continuous integration tool will do it for you, or you write the script for the customer to push the button. So make sure it's the customer's responsibility. But when they finish their acceptance test, they roll the feature out from the test server to the production server. It can be ideal. A really small team where you've got a customer who's completely technologically clueless, then you may end up with a production server login. But in an ideal world, you shouldn't. So, probably because the temptation to fix stuff on the production server just becomes overwhelming. I know, I'm guilty as hell of doing this myself. But you will break stuff eventually on a production server if you try and fix it. It's just one of those things. Any other questions?
Yeah, just a question regarding versioning and using Git. What's the best practice to, let's say you want to change developers, what's the best way to go about it? How much access do you get when you use Git?
So you've created an entire product using one developer, that's all sitting in Git, you've got control of the servers, and now you want to change the developer to a different developer. The first thing you're going to find is that a new developer will want to rewrite half your code. It happens every single time, not invented here syndrome, it's really common with developers, and they'll look at it and go, oh, that's hideous, I don't like that, I really want to. So, again, it's a relationship thing, you have to manage them. There will be a whole bunch of features which they will insist that they need to rewrite because they don't like them. It doesn't fit with the way they're thinking. There'll be a bunch of features that you want the new developers to write. And so go back to the Trello board and have all of these up on the board and work through that dialogue with the developer. You should give them complete access to the source code. And again, development server and test server, they should have access to. But don't let them anywhere near the production server, obviously, until the stuff's ready.
There's a system called Git Flow, which is basically just a policy for branching and merging. And you've got a bug fix branch, and then you've got a testing branch, and so on. What you can do is make sure that only an authoritative person, someone you trust, has access to the main branch. Right? And so most developers won't be able to merge into that branch. Okay, so look up Git Flow, it's called. It's pretty good.
Cool. Thank you. Do you have a question?
I was just going to say, from personal experience, when handing from one developer over the other, you'll find that the new developer will normally say that when they look at the code, any bugs that they find in it are not their responsibility. So that's where it comes down to making sure that your statement of work with your existing developer in your warranty period is rock solid. So that you still can go back to them on normally the new developer wouldn't warrant the work they did based on the old code.
I think it would be a really rare developer who would be prepared to go back and fix code that you've now taken and given to another developer. So, yeah. This highlights the importance of unit testing. If you haven't got a set of unit tests that covers most of your code, then you don't know where you are with it. So,
I continue to what he said. I don't think there's such warranty on bugs. Every developer, every project you'll find you have bugs. But I think the most important thing from what Marcus said before is that develop this relationship with the developer and really try not to spot the developer in the middle of the project. So no matter how hard it is to actually sort somebody out, take the extra time, take the extra month, the extra 2 months to find a person that you feel really comfortable with, that not only can do the job, but you can live with for the length of the project.
Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely a relationship. You should consider your developer part of your whole team. Anything else? No? Okay. Thanks a lot.